I didn't know my life was about to fracture into a before and an after the night a teenage girl accused me of sleeping with her husband. 8 months into my marriage, I was sitting on the couch beside my husband Daniel when his phone buzzed. I remember the soft glow of the television against the walls, the smell of basil from the pasta we'd cooked together, the way everything felt painfully ordinary. Then he handed me his phone. "Read this," he said quietly. The message was from a 19-year-old girl named Brittany, long dark hair, a filtered smile in her profile photo. Her words were simple and venomous. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Your wife and I hooked up 3 months ago." My lungs stopped working. For a second, I thought it was a prank, a hacked account, some cruel mistake. I had never even heard of her. Daniel stared at me like he was watching something fragile shatter. "I swear to you, Sarah," he said, voice tight, "I don't know who she is." And the strange thing, I believed him. But what I didn't know yet, what neither of us understood in that moment, was that this wasn't about cheating. It was about power. It was about a wealthy, bitter man who had never forgiven me for marrying his son without a trust fund. It was about a father who had once stood in a room full of guests and tried to publicly announce an engagement between Daniel and another woman, someone more suitable, someone from private equity, someone rich. And when that humiliation failed, he escalated. By the end of that month, my mother-in-law would be filing for divorce. And by the end of that year, the man who tried to destroy my marriage would lose everything he thought made him powerful. But that night, all I knew was this. Someone was trying to frame me, and I had no idea how deep the betrayal actually went. I'm Sarah. I was 27 when Daniel and I got married, and 23 when I met him. People always assume that because I came from a well-connected family, my life must have been easy, curated, protected. The truth is, I grew up learning how to smile while people measured me. My mom, Jane, was warm in a quiet way, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthdays, who asked follow-up questions and actually listened to the answers. My dad, Richard, was impressive on paper. Finance, business circles, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make people straighten their posture without saying a word. But inside our house, he treated love like a transaction. You didn't just get it, you earned it. So when I met Daniel in 2021 at a mutual friend's birthday party, it felt like breathing real air for the first time. He was there with some college buddies, hanging back near the edge of the crowd like he didn't want to take up too much space. I noticed him because he wasn't performing. Everyone else was louder, flashier, constantly proving something. Daniel just existed, calm, observant, kind eyes that didn't scan me like a price tag. We started talking near the drinks table. I told him I was having cranberry juice with vodka because I needed something safe. He made a stupid joke about how that was the most responsible choice at a party like this, and I laughed. Not the polite laugh I'd perfected around my father's friends, but a real one that surprised even me. We talked for 2 hours straight. The music was loud, so we leaned in close. Not in a forced, flirtatious way. In that natural way where your body moves towards someone because you trust them without knowing why yet. He told me he was a freelance graphic designer. He worked from home. He liked the quiet. He liked the freedom. I told him I worked in marketing for a tech company and that I lived in spreadsheets and deadlines. He asked questions like he actually cared about the answers. When he walked me to my car, he hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, then asked for my number like it was a risk. I gave it to him like it wasn't. Our first date was at a coffee shop downtown. I ordered a latte with extra foam because I always order the same thing when I'm nervous. And he got black coffee like a person who didn't need sugar to survive life. We talked about family. He told me about his parents, a dad who worked construction for decades, a mom who was a nurse at a community hospital. They saved every penny to put him through state college. He took out loans, paid them off in his 20s, and never spoke about it like he was owed a medal for surviving. I told him about my parents in vague, careful language. Mom stayed home when I was little, I said. Dad works in finance. I didn't mention the size of the house. I didn't mention the gated neighborhood. I didn't mention the way my father asked people what they made before he asked how they were. Not because I was ashamed of money, but because I was ashamed of what it did to people. We dated 6 months before I brought him home. I kept delaying it, telling myself I was being protective. Of him, of us, of my peace. Daniel didn't push. That's the thing about him. He never tried to force love out of me. He just stayed present, patient, steady. But eventually, I couldn't keep him separate from my life forever. So I invited him to dinner. He arrived with flowers for my mother and a bottle of wine like he was walking into a normal house. And when he pulled into our driveway and saw the mansion, the long stretch of stone, the gate code, the Mercedes and Range Rover parked like decorations, I watched his face carefully. He didn't look greedy. He looked braced, like he already sensed what my father would do with this information. And he was right. Because the moment Daniel stepped inside, my father didn't greet him like a person. He evaluated him like a threat. The first time my father asked Daniel how much he made, it was before the appetizers were even served. We were still standing in the living room. My mother had just taken his coat. Daniel was holding the wine he brought like it was a peace offering. "So," my father said from his leather armchair without standing up, "what's your annual income?" Just like that. No preface, no warmth. Daniel blinked once. "I'm a freelance graphic designer," he replied evenly. "It varies year to year." "That wasn't my question," my father said. I felt heat crawl up my neck. "Dad," I cut in sharply, "that's not appropriate dinner conversation." He didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes on Daniel. "Rough estimate," he insisted. Daniel gave him a number. It was honest, modest, hard-earned. My father nodded slowly, like he was mentally running projections. "And you're comfortable supporting a certain lifestyle on that?" There it was. Not curiosity. Judgment. The dinner that followed felt like a job interview I hadn't approved. My mother tried to steer conversation toward hobbies, travel, books. My father interrupted every few minutes. "Where did you go to college? Do you own property? What's your 5-year plan? Do you have retirement investments?" Daniel answered each question without defensiveness. Calm, respectful. He never shrank, but he didn't posture either. That restraint infuriated my father. After dessert, I pulled Daniel aside near the hallway. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He shook his head gently. "It's okay. I've handled worse clients." I laughed despite myself. "He'll warm up," I said, half hoping, half lying. He didn't. Over the next 2 years, my father made it clear Daniel was temporary in his mind. At family gatherings, he introduced him as Sarah's friend, even after we'd been together for over a year. When we got engaged, my father told extended relatives she's exploring her options. Once, during a holiday dinner, he said, loudly, "So Daniel, when are you planning to stop freelancing and get a real job?" I saw Daniel's jaw tighten for half a second. Then he smiled. "When I find one that lets me build the life I want." My father laughed like that was naive. The worst moment came a year before our wedding. It was my cousin's birthday party. 40 people in the backyard, champagne flutes clinking. My father stood up to make a toast. He spoke about how proud he was of me, about family legacy, about tradition. Then he cleared his throat. "And," he said smoothly, "I'm excited to announce Sarah's engagement." People clapped instinctively. Daniel squeezed my hand, but my father lifted his palm. "Not to Daniel," he said. "To Trevor, the son of my business partner, a fine young man in private equity." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel went still beside me. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the stone patio. "That is not happening," I said, voice shaking but loud. "I'm marrying Daniel." My father's expression hardened. "This has already been discussed." "With who?" I demanded. "With people who understand what's appropriate." I walked out before I started crying in front of everyone. Daniel followed me to his car. We sat in the parking lot for an hour while I tried to steady my breathing. "He's been talking about Trevor for months," I confessed. I kept shutting it down. I didn't think he'd humiliate us like that. Daniel took my hands. "You don't owe anyone a performance, Sarah." But that night planted something ugly. It wasn't just disapproval. It was obsession. My father didn't just dislike Daniel. He resented him. Because Daniel represented something my father had never been able to accept about himself. He had married into money. And somewhere deep inside, he still felt like an outsider. And instead of confronting that insecurity, he decided to punish us for it. We got married anyway. A small ceremony, 60 guests, simple flowers. My grandparents, my mother's parents, mine's, paid for everything without hesitation. They had always liked Daniel. "He works hard," my grandfather said. "That's worth more than a trust fund." My father showed up, but he didn't speak to Daniel. He sat in the back row with his arms crossed during the ceremony, like he was attending a corporate merger he didn't approve of. That should have been the last warning. But the real omen came that morning. A delivery man arrived at the venue holding a bouquet of black roses. Not dark red, black. The kind of flowers you send when you want to make a point. I opened the card. My hands started shaking before I even finished reading it. "Don't come crying to me when he leaves you for your money." Signed with my father's initials. Daniel saw the color drain from my face. "What does it say?" I handed it to him. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened in a way that meant he was trying very hard not to react. I called my mother immediately. "Did you know about this?" I asked. Her voice sounded tired. "No, I'm so sorry." I threw the roses in the trash. We got married anyway. For 5 weeks after the honeymoon in Greece, life felt normal. We moved into our apartment. Daniel worked from home. I went into the office 3 days a week. We cooked dinner together. We argued about dishes. We laughed at stupid shows. Routine felt like rebellion. Then came the message. We were on the couch when Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then handed it to me without a word. The Facebook message from Brittany glowed against the dim light. "I need to tell you something important. Your wife and I hooked up 3 months ago. I thought you deserved to know." 3 months ago, before the wedding. My stomach dropped, like I'd missed a step on the stairs. "I've never seen her," I whispered. Daniel's voice was tight. "I know." But he still looked afraid, not of guilt, of what this could do to us. I opened Brittany's profile. She looked young, too young. We messaged her back. She responded quickly, too quickly. She claimed we matched it on Tinder in early spring. I had never had Tinder. She said we met at a bar downtown. She described our apartment layout, information that could have easily been pulled from social media posts. She said we hooked up and I ghosted her. Daniel sat beside me, silent, giving me space. "Send screenshots," I typed. She said she deleted the app. "Convenient," I muttered. Then something shifted inside me. Instead of spiraling, instead of screaming or accusing, I did what I'd watched my father do my entire life when cornered. I became cold. "Send me your phone number," I wrote. She did. I called her immediately and put it on speaker. Her voice sounded younger than 19. I asked calm, precise questions. "What was I wearing?" She hesitated. "What did we talk about?" Vague answer. "What car did I drive?" Another vague answer. Daniel reached for my hand under the couch cushion. Then I changed my tone. "I'm hiring a private investigator," I said evenly. "And if you're lying, I'll sue you for harassment and defamation. My family has lawyers on retainer." Silence. Then she started crying. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "It wasn't my idea." Daniel's grip tightened. "Whose idea was it?" I asked. She hesitated again. "If you don't give me a name," I continued, "this moves forward legally." "It was Richard," she whispered. The room went silent. "My father." Daniel inhaled sharply. Brittany kept talking, words tumbling over each other. "He messaged me online months ago," she said. "He offered me money to contact you and say we had an affair. He told me what to say." I felt like the floor had tilted. "Why would you agree to that?" I asked. There was a pause. Then her voice dropped. "We've been seeing each other for over a year." I couldn't breathe. "We met at a restaurant where I worked. He started coming in regularly. He said his marriage was ending." Daniel stared at the wall like he was trying to process a foreign language. "How old are you?" I asked quietly. 19. My chest tightened. "Do you have proof?" I asked. "Yes." "Send it." We ended the call. 10 minutes later, the photos started arriving. Hotel rooms, restaurants, text messages, videos. My father calling her baby, promising to leave my mother, talking about starting over. Daniel didn't speak. I kept scrolling, zooming in, verifying backgrounds, checking timestamps. I didn't cry. Not yet, because the worst part wasn't the affair. It was this. He hadn't just betrayed my mother. He had weaponized his teenage mistress to try to destroy my marriage. And suddenly, everything, the black roses, the humiliation at the party, the obsession with Trevor, made horrifying sense. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about control. And he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. After the photos stopped coming in, the apartment felt too small for the weight of what we'd just seen. Daniel stood up first. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, then didn't drink it. His shoulders were rigid, like he was bracing for impact that had already happened. I stayed on the couch, phone in my hand, staring at a hotel selfie of my father and Brittany. He looked relaxed, younger, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. That hurt more than I expected. Daniel came back and sat beside me. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I laughed once, short and hollow. "That's a strange question right now." He nodded. "Fair." Silence stretched between us. "I need you to tell me something honestly," he said carefully. "Do you believe me?" I turned toward him fully. "Yes." No hesitation. Because here was the truth. If Daniel had wanted to cheat, he could have. He worked from home, yes, but I had full access to his devices. We shared passwords. We shared space. We shared everything. There had never been secrecy. But my father? He thrived on secrecy. Daniel exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath since the message arrived. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with this," he said. "Because of me." "Because of him," I corrected quietly. Still, a part of me asked the dangerous question. Had I ignored signs? Had I underestimated my father's resentment? Had I thought marriage would magically end his obsession with control? I replayed the black roses, the public engagement announcement, the way he never referred to Daniel as my husband. This wasn't sudden. It was escalation. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on knees. What are you going to do? That question carried more weight than he realized, because this wasn't just a scandal. This was my family, my mother, our name, our private dysfunction dragged into something ugly and public. I need to understand something first, I said slowly. Why he thinks he can do this. Daniel didn't answer, because he knew. It wasn't about logic. It was about ego. I stood up and started pacing. My heartbeat felt steady, too steady. When he married my mom, I said, almost to myself, her parents didn't approve of him. Daniel looked up. I didn't know that. They thought he was after her money. He came from a middle-class family in Ohio, worked his way up, earned respect, proved himself. I stopped pacing. And now he sees you, and sees his younger self. Daniel frowned. But that doesn't... It does, I cut in gently. He never fully stopped feeling like the outsider who married into wealth. And instead of processing that insecurity, he projected it onto you. Daniel leaned back slowly, absorbing that. So he tried to prove you were a gold digger, he said. Yes, but that backfired. He escalated. The realization sat heavy in my chest. This wasn't about morality. It wasn't about family reputation. It was about him needing to rewrite the narrative. If I married someone wealthy, someone like Trevor, then my father wouldn't be the only one who married up. He wouldn't be alone in that insecurity. But I had chosen differently, and that choice threatened him. Daniel reached for my hand. Whatever you decide, he said quietly, I'm with you. I believe that too. But another fear crept in. This wasn't just my father's betrayal. This was my mother's humiliation. And if Brittany was telling the truth, if the affair had been going on for over a year, then my mother had been living inside a lie. I picked up my phone again. I need to see her, I said. Tonight? Yes. Daniel squeezed my hand once more. I'll drive. On the way there, I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one flashing like a ticking clock. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I felt surgical, like I was about to cut something open and there would be no stitching it back together. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Grand. Perfect. Illuminated. From the outside, nothing about it suggested rot. I took a slow breath. Ready? Daniel asked. No, but I stepped out of the car anyway, because the first confrontation was no longer optional. It was inevitable. My mother answered the door. She smiled at first. That automatic practice smile. Then paused when she saw my face. Sarah, is everything all right? Can we come in? I asked. She stepped aside immediately. My father was in the living room, sitting in his usual armchair. Television on, glass of scotch in his hand. He looked up briefly, annoyed at the interruption. What's this? He said. Unscheduled visit? Daniel stayed slightly behind me, silent but present. I didn't sit. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I received an interesting message tonight, I said evenly. My father didn't react. From a girl named Brittany. There, a flicker. Subtle, but I saw it. My mother glanced between us. Who is Brittany? A 19-year-old hostess, I answered. Apparently someone Dad has been seeing for over a year. The room went very still. My father laughed. A short, dismissive sound. You're being ridiculous. I didn't argue. I walked over to the coffee table and placed my phone down, screen facing up. Hotel photo. My father's face. Undeniable. My mother stepped forward slowly. She picked up the phone. Her hand didn't shake. Not yet. She swiped. Another photo. A video thumbnail. A text message where he wrote, I can't wait to marry you once I'm free. Her breathing changed first, slower, controlled. She turned to him. Is this real? He didn't answer. Richard, she repeated, voice firmer. Is this real? He set his glass down carefully. This is a misunderstanding. Daniel shifted slightly behind me. A misunderstanding, I said quietly. You paid her to accuse me of cheating. That made my mother look at me sharply. What? He approached her months ago, I continued, offered her money to contact Daniel and claim we had an affair. My father stood up now. This is absurd, he snapped. You're believing a teenager over your own father? She has photos, I said, videos, text messages. She could have fabricated. She also has bank transfers, I cut in. Silence. That was the first time his mask cracked fully. My mother sat down slowly in the armchair he had just vacated. She looked smaller, not physically, emotionally. How long? She asked. He didn't answer. How long? She repeated louder. Over a year, I said softly. My father shot me a glare. You don't know that. She does, I replied calmly, because she sent timestamps. My mother stood up abruptly. She walked to the kitchen. For a moment, I thought she needed space. Then she returned with a glass of water. She walked straight up to him and threw it in his face. The sound was sharp and final. Water dripped down his suit jacket. "You humiliated our daughter," she said, voice trembling now. "You tried to destroy her marriage." He wiped his face angrily. "I was protecting her." "By sleeping with a teenager?" she demanded. He hesitated. "I was trying to prevent her from making the same mistake you did," he snapped. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother went still. "What did you just say?" "You married beneath you," he continued, voice rising. "And now she has too." Daniel stiffened beside me. My chest felt hollow. "You resent him," I said quietly, "because he reminds you of yourself." He turned on me sharply. "Don't psychoanalyze me." "You married into wealth and never stopped feeling like you didn't belong," I continued. "So you decided I shouldn't marry for love unless it preserved your ego." "Enough," he barked. My mother slapped him. Hard. The sound echoed. "Get out," she said. He stared at her. "I built this life with you." "No," she corrected, voice steady now. "My parents built it, and you tried to burn it down because you couldn't stand not being in control." He looked around the room. The furniture, the art, the walls that had always symbolized power. Then he looked at me. "This isn't over," he said quietly. But it was. He left without another word. The door closed. And for the first time in my life, the house felt honest. My mother sank onto the couch. I knelt in front of her. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. She shook her head slowly. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "The travel, the phone calls, I chose not to see it." Daniel stepped forward gently. "None of this is your fault." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something softened. "I misjudged you," she said quietly. "I allowed his behavior toward you for too long." Daniel nodded respectfully. "You were protecting your marriage." She laughed bitterly. Apparently I wasn't. The next few weeks were chaos. Lawyers, private investigators, forensic accountants, and more revelations. The family money, everything substantial, was in my mother's name and my grandparents' trusts. My father had status, a salary, but no ownership. He had spent 30 years building influence, not equity. And when the divorce papers were filed, he discovered just how little was actually his. But the escalation didn't stop there. His side of the family started calling me, accusing me of exaggerating, of destroying the marriage. His sister left me a voicemail saying, "Men make mistakes. You didn't have to blow this up." Blow this up? He tried to frame me for adultery. He weaponized her to destroy my marriage. And I was the one who blew it up. Daniel's phone buzzed one evening. A text from my father. "You'll regret humiliating me." Daniel showed it to me immediately. He didn't respond. He just blocked him. That's when I understood something clearly. This wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about consequence. And my father had never learned how to handle that. For weeks after that confrontation, I functioned like someone walking through smoke. Everything was technically visible. Work, meals, conversations, but muted, distant, as if I were watching my own life through glass. The divorce process moved quickly. My mother's lawyers were efficient and ruthless. They didn't argue emotionally. They argued structurally. Assets in her name. Trust protections. Prenuptial clauses from 30 years ago that my grandparents had insisted on. My father fought at first. Then he realized there was nothing to fight for. And that was when the anger turned outward. He started sending messages. Not to my mother. To me. "You destroyed this family. You manipulated her. You turned everyone against me." Daniel blocked him immediately on every platform. I did the same. But words don't disappear just because you delete them. They linger. And in the quiet moments, when Daniel was asleep beside me, when the apartment lights were off, I would lie awake and wonder, had I triggered this? If I had married someone wealthy, would he have spiraled this far? If I had confronted him sooner about his behavior toward Daniel, would he have escalated differently? There is something uniquely painful about realizing a parent sees you not as a daughter, but as an extension of their pride. And when you don't perform the script they wrote for you, they retaliate. The darkest moment didn't come from the affair photos. It came 2 months later. My mother went in for a routine checkup. The doctor ran tests, found an infection, an STD, something my father had brought home from Brittany or from someone else. My mother had to undergo treatment for months. When she told me, her voice was steady. "I'm fine," she said, but I could hear the humiliation underneath. 30 years of marriage, reduced to lab results. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor of our apartment and cried for the first time. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, knees pulled to my chest. Daniel found me there. He didn't ask questions. He just sat beside me and wrapped his arms around me. "I feel stupid," I whispered. "For what?" "For believing he was still something solid." Daniel rested his chin against my head. "You're grieving the father you thought you had," he said softly. Not the man he turned out to be. That broke something open inside me, because it was true. The man who sent black roses. The man who paid a teenager to accuse me of cheating. The man who exposed my mother to disease and humiliation. That man was real. But so was the father who taught me to ride a bike. The one who stayed up late helping me with math homework. Reconciling those two versions felt impossible. At family gatherings, the few that still happened, there was an empty space where he used to sit. Some relatives avoided eye contact. Some whispered. But my grandparents did something I will never forget. They invited Daniel and me to dinner alone. My grandfather poured wine. My grandmother held my hands. "We're proud of you," she said. "Not because you exposed him, but because you didn't let him control your marriage." I hadn't realized how deeply I'd internalized that fear. That somehow, even after everything, he might still find a way to poison what Daniel and I had. Control doesn't disappear just because someone leaves the room. It lingers in your nervous system. It makes you question stability. One night, Daniel looked at me across the dinner table and asked gently, "Are you still worried I'll resent all of this?" I blinked. "Resent what?" "Your family drama," he said carefully. "Your father's actions." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't create this," I said. "He did." "But it's heavy," he replied. "Yes," I admitted. "It is." That was the lowest point. Not rage, not scandal, but the weight. The realization that someone who should have protected me tried to dismantle my life because he couldn't stand losing control. And the terrifying awareness that love doesn't immunize you against betrayal. You can do everything right. You can marry for the right reasons. You can defend your partner publicly. And someone will still try to burn it down. That was the night I stopped asking why and started asking, what now? Because rock bottom doesn't just hurt. It clarifies. The turning point didn't come from another scandal. It came from silence. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, my father stopped contacting us. No more threats, no more accusations. Just absence. And absence can be louder than rage. One afternoon, my mother came over for dinner like she had started doing every Sunday. She looked different. Lighter. Not happier. Not yet. But unburdened. Over pasta and wine, she said something that shifted everything for me. "I stayed in that marriage longer than I should have," she admitted quietly. Daniel and I both looked up. "I thought I was protecting you," she continued. "I thought stability mattered more than confrontation. I told myself his temper was manageable. His ego was harmless." She paused. "It wasn't harmless. It just didn't hit me directly until now." I swallowed. "You don't have to defend him anymore," she added gently. "And you don't have to carry the embarrassment either." That was the first time I realized something crucial. I had still been carrying shame. Not for what he did, but for being connected to it. As if his behavior reflected on me. As if my choice to marry Daniel had somehow triggered the collapse. It hadn't. His insecurity had been there long before Daniel. I just forced it into the light. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Brittany reached out again. Not to accuse, to apologize. She asked if we could meet in a public place. I hesitated, then agreed. Daniel came with me, but waited at another table. Brittany looked younger in person, smaller, nervous. "I didn't understand what I was getting into," she said, eyes red. "He told me you were spoiled, that you were using him, that your marriage was fake." I let her speak. "He promised he'd leave his wife," she continued. "He said once you and Daniel broke up, everything would be simpler." I studied her face. "You were 19, I said quietly. She nodded. "He was nearly 60. She looked down. "I thought I was special." The room felt heavy. "You weren't the villain," I told her honestly. "You were a tool." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I left him," she said. "He's not who I thought." I believed her. Because men like my father don't change their patterns. They just shift targets. When I left the cafe, Daniel met my eyes. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, and meant it. Because that conversation sealed something inside me. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about public humiliation. It was about exposure. Truth has a strange way of stabilizing chaos. A month later, I heard through relatives that my father was struggling to find work. In finance, reputation is currency. And once word spreads, quietly, strategically, doors close. My grandparents hadn't made a public spectacle. They didn't need to. They simply stopped protecting him. Connections dried up. Invitations stopped. For the first time in his life, he couldn't leverage my mother's name. And suddenly, his power looked fragile. Daniel and I were house hunting when I realized something almost startling. We weren't tense anymore. There was no looming shadow. No black roses. No fake scandals. Just choices. "What kind of kitchen do you want?" Daniel asked as we toured a small brick house with sunlight pouring through wide windows. "Something bright," I said. "Not grand. Not impressive. Bright." Because that's what the turning point gave me. Not triumph. Clarity. I wasn't the daughter of a powerful man anymore. I was a woman who chose her partner and defended her marriage. And the man who tried to destroy it had exposed himself instead. That was enough. The consequences didn't explode. They unraveled. Quietly. Efficiently. My father always believed power meant controlling the narrative. He was the kind of man who curated his reputation like a portfolio. Careful, calculated, strategic. But once the truth was documented, photos, bank transfers, messages, he couldn't spin it. He tried at first. He told distant relatives that the affair was complicated, that he had been emotionally separated from my mother for years, that I had overreacted to protect my husband. But evidence doesn't negotiate. My mother's lawyers handled the divorce with surgical precision. Every asset traced, every account documented. Everything substantial had always been under my mother's name or my grandparents' trusts. When the settlement was finalized, my father walked away with his car, personal belongings, and a severance agreement from the family business. No equity, no property, no legacy. I didn't celebrate. I just observed. For 30 years, he had projected confidence like armor at board meetings, at charity events, at dinner parties. Now he was living in a rented apartment. That's when something else surfaced. My grandparents made a decision. They formally removed him from all remaining management roles in the real estate company. No dramatic announcement, no public humiliation, just paperwork. And in their social circle, paperwork speaks louder than gossip. Invitations to fundraisers stopped coming. Old colleagues stopped returning calls. A man who once measured other people's worth by their income was now discovering how quickly influence evaporates when it's borrowed. Meanwhile, Daniel and I focused on normalcy. We toured houses. We argued about mortgage rates. We painted sample colors on tiny drywall squares and debated between soft linen and morning haze. One evening, as we were assembling IKEA shelves in our new living room, Daniel paused mid-screw and said, "It's quieter." I looked around. He was right. There was no tension humming in the background. No subtle dread before family events. No anticipation of a cutting remark. Just air. The last message my father ever sent me came 3 months after the divorce was finalized. "You think you won? You destroyed your own family." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted it. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to participate in someone else's insecurity. My mother thrived in ways I hadn't expected. She redecorated the house, removed his portrait from the hallway, reconnected with friends she hadn't seen in years because he'd quietly isolated her from them. At Sunday dinners, she laughed more freely. One evening, she said something that stayed with me. "I thought keeping the marriage intact was protecting you," she said. "But what you did, choosing love over status, forced me to see what I had been tolerating." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You don't owe anyone permanence," I told her. "Not even a marriage, especially not one built on ego." As for Brittany, I heard she moved back to her hometown. She enrolled in community college, reclaimed her job at another restaurant. She wasn't the villain in my story. She was a symptom. My father tried once to repair his image publicly. He posted a vague statement online about personal growth and misunderstandings. The comments were limited. But reputations don't heal with captions. They heal with character. And character can't be fabricated. Daniel's family, who had once been quietly intimidated by my father's wealth and presence, now treated me differently too. Not because of money, because they had watched how I handled chaos. One night, Daniel's mother hugged me and whispered, "You're stronger than he ever understood." Strength. It didn't feel like strength at the time. It felt like necessity. But looking back, I realized something important. The man who tried to frame me for adultery lost his marriage, his standing, and his illusion of control. And I didn't have to destroy him. He dismantled himself. All I did was refuse to lie. It's been a year now. Daniel and I wake up in a house that smells like fresh coffee and new paint instead of tension. There are still dishes in the sink sometimes. We still argue about small things. Life didn't become cinematic or dramatic after everything collapsed. It became honest. I used to think family loyalty meant silence, that protecting the image mattered more than exposing the truth. But here's what I learned. Silence protects the wrong person. When my father sent black roses on my wedding day, I thought that was the cruelest thing he could do. I was wrong. The cruelest thing was trying to rewrite my reality, trying to make me question my own marriage, trying to weaponize a young woman to fracture something healthy because he couldn't tolerate not being in control. And the most dangerous lie I almost believed was this, that his insecurity was somehow my responsibility. It wasn't. You cannot shrink yourself enough to soothe someone who is determined to feel threatened. You cannot marry strategically enough to fix a parent's ego. You cannot be obedient enough to earn unconditional love from someone who measures love in status and power. What you can do is choose. Choose who you stand beside. Choose who you defend. Choose when to walk away. Daniel once asked me if I regretted confronting everything so directly. I don't. Because if I had stayed quiet, if I had tried to manage it, he would still be hovering in the background of my life, pulling strings, whispering doubts. Instead, he exposed himself. And exposure is the great equalizer. The girl who was framed. The wife who was tested. The daughter who was disappointed. All of those versions of me survived. But the woman who stands here now, she doesn't need approval to validate her choices. She doesn't need wealth to define her marriage. And she certainly doesn't need a father's permission to protect her own happiness. That's the real ending. Not scandal. Not revenge. Just freedom.